It was supposed to be a weekend of escape. No Wi-Fi, no city noise, no endless stream of notifications buzzing in their pockets. Just 4 friends, a rented cabin, and the wilderness pressing against them like an old, forgotten secret. The cabin stood at the edge of Pine Hollow, a dense forest that stretched like a black ocean in all directions. The trees here were tall, skeletal things that seemed to whisper against each other when the wind passed through, though locals swore they whispered even on nights when the air was still. The caretaker, a pale man with a limp and eyes that seemed too tired for his age, had offered them one last warning before handing over the keys. Stay inside after dark, and if you hear tapping on the windows, don't look. They laughed it off, the way city kids always laugh at small-town superstitions. Every creepy cabin came with a story. That was half the fun. By evening, the group, Mark, Jenna, Chris, and Alyssa, were drinking cheap beer on the porch, watching the sky burn orange behind the endless rows of pine. Mark, the planner of the trip, stretched his arms wide. See? Worth the 3-hour drive. No cars, no neighbors, just us in the woods. Just us and the mosquitoes, Jenna muttered, slapping her leg. Chris leaned against the railing, bearkin dangling. If a bear shows up, I'm throwing you first, Mark. Laughter filled the air, but Alyssa's eyes kept drifting toward the forest line. The trees stood too still, their shadows too heavy. Even with the laughter, there was a strange heaviness in the air, as though the woods themselves were listening. Inside, the cabin was rustic but cozy. A stone fireplace sat at the center, the kind that looked like it could swallow a person whole. The wooden floors groaned with every step, like the house itself had something to say. Mounted deer heads stared from the walls with lifeless eyes, and one in particular had a crack across its glassy pupil that made Alyssa uneasy. They ate frozen pizza cooked over the oven, played cards by lantern light, and told ghost stories by the fire. Chris, always a jokester, leaned in with a flashlight under his chin. The Pine Hollow haunt, he whispered, a woman in white who wanders the trees. They say if you see her face, you'll never leave the woods again. Alyssa rolled her eyes but kept glancing at the windows, where only blackness pressed back. Mark smirked. Classic. Every forest has a lady in white. Guess we'll add her to the guest list. It wasn't until just past midnight when the first sound came. Tap, tap, tap. Soft, careful, like fingers testing the glass. Mark froze mid-sentence. Probably a branch, he muttered, though the nearest tree was at least 10 feet away. Tap, tap, tap. This time, the sound came from the opposite side of the cabin. Jenna's beer slipped from her hand, the glass shattering on the floorboards. Nobody laughed now. Chris grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the window, but Alyssa caught his arm. The caretaker said not to look. Chris smirked, though his lips trembled. You don't actually believe that crap, do you? He flicked the light on, beam cutting through the glass. Nothing, just a reflection of their own pale faces staring back. But then, in the reflection, something moved. Not outside, not inside. Between. It was like a shadow lingering just beyond the glass, featureless but heavy, bending the air around it. And in the brief second before Chris killed the light, they all heard it. A voice. A whisper so close it could have been in their ears. Let me in. The room went silent. Chris backed away from the window, his usual cocky grin gone. Probably the wind, he muttered, but his voice cracked. Mark shook his head. Nope, that was a voice. I heard it too. Alyssa hugged her knees, her face pale. We should leave. Right now. But the thought of braving the woods at night was somehow worse than staying inside with what Teva had just whispered. They decided to pile into the living room, sleeping bags unrolled by the fire. Nobody admitted they were too scared to sleep alone, but it was obvious. The tapping stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the old wood, felt alive, as if the house itself was breathing. Somewhere around 3 a.m, Jenna stirred awake. She hadn't meant to, but the sound pulled her out of sleep. Not tapping this time. Whispers, dozens of them, sliding across the windows, as though the entire forest had leaned close to murmur through the glass. She sat up slowly, her chest tight, and turned toward the window. Shapes were pressed against it. Not faces exactly, but impressions, like breath fogging the glass from the outside. Fingers trace along the panes. Thin, spidery fingers, too long to be human. Her throat locked. She wanted to scream, to wake the others, but a single thought rooted her in place. If they know I see them, they'll come inside. The whispers grew louder. A chorus of voices, overlapping, pleading. Let us in. We're so cold. Let us in. Her body shook with terror, but she forced herself to slide back under her blanket, squeezing her eyes shut until morning light finally bled through the curtains. When the others woke, Jenna said nothing, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling, even when the sun was high. They tried to laugh it off over breakfast. Chris cracked jokes. Mark insisted it was just a wind. Alyssa prayed silently over her coffee. But when Jenna finally lifted her eye from the table, she froze. On the inside of the window, just behind where Chris sat, was a single word traced into the condensation of the glass. Soon. The single word smeared on the inside of the window. Soon. Hung in the air heavier than smoke. Chris swore under his breath. Okay, which one of you thought this was funny? No one answered. Jenna's face was pale, her hands trembling so badly her coffee spilled. Alyssa whispered, "It wasn't us." Mark stood up, his jaw tight. "We're not doing this. Someone's messing with us. Probably that creepy caretaker trying to scare city kids." But deep down, he didn't believe his own words. They decided to leave the cabin that afternoon. The plan was simple. Pack, drive out, and never look back. But when they went outside to load their bags, the car wouldn't start. Mark tried the ignition again and again. Nothing. The engine coughed once and went silent. Chris popped the hood, pretending to know more than he did. But what he found made his stomach twist. The wires weren't just chewed or worn. They'd been cut. Cleanly. Deliberately. Someone wanted them stranded. Could be animals, Chris muttered weakly, but no one believed that. Back inside, the mood grew darker. Jenna sat silently on the couch, knees pulled up, her eyes darting to the windows as though she expected faces to appear. Alyssa whispered prayers under her breath, a rosary hidden in her pocket. Mark paced, muttering curses. That night, they built the fire bigger, the flames crackling against the silence. They stayed together, refusing to split into bedrooms. Even Chris, who usually mocked everything, kept close to the group. Midnight came, and with it, the tapping. Tap, tap, tap. This time, it was louder, harder, coming from all sides at once. Jenna whimpered, covering her ears. Alyssa gripped the rosary so tight the beads cut into her skin. "Don't look," Mark whispered. "Don't. Just don't." But Chris couldn't help himself. The sound gnawed at his curiosity, pulling him toward the window like a hook in his chest. "Chris, don't," Alyssa hissed, but it was too late. He pulled back the curtain. For a heartbeat, there was nothing, just darkness pressing against the glass. Then the darkness moved. Dozens of faces emerged from black, pale and stretched thin, eyes hollow, mouths wide with hunger. They pressed against the glass as though the barrier were made of nothing at all. Fingers scraped down the window, leaving streaks like claws. Chris stumbled back, screaming. The others turned just in time to see the glass bulge inward, as though something outside were pushing against it. And then, crack! A long fracture split across the pane. Mark grabbed a chair and shoved it against the window, his voice breaking. "We can't stay here." The caretaker's word came back to Jenna in a rush. "Don't look. Don't let them in." But Chris had looked, and now they were coming. They barricaded the doors and windows with whatever they could find. Chairs, the heavy table, even the deer heads ripped from the walls. The cabin groaned under the pressure of the night outside. Hours passed in a haze of fear. They huddled close, whispering prayers, jumping at every sound. But somewhere near dawn, they realized Chris was gone. His sleeping bag lay empty, the blankets tossed aside. The door was still locked, barricaded from the inside. Yet he was nowhere. "Maybe he is in the bathroom," Mark said, but his voice was hollow. The bathroom was empty. All that remained was a trail of wet footprints leading from the living room to the door. Footprints too long, too thin, with more than 5 toes. Alyssa broke then, sobbing into her hands. Jenna rocked silently back and forth. Mark stared at the door, his face white. They never saw Chris again. By the second night, the whispers returned. One is ours, the rest will follow. The voices slid through the cracks in the wood, curling into their ears, making the air feel thick and rotten. That night, Jen awoke to the sound of someone crying outside the window. "Help me," the voice sobbed. "It's me, Chris. Please, let me in." Her heart broke at the sound, but something in the tone was wrong. It was too smooth, too careful, like a recording played back by something that didn't understand human voices. She clamped her hands over her ears and didn't move until morning. By the third day, food was running out. Mark tried to hike through the forest to find help, but after hours of walking, he returned, pale and shaking. "I kept walking straight. I should have hit the road by now, but it's just trees. The forest doesn't end." It was a trap. They were never meant to leave. That night, the cabin grew colder. The fire barely burned, no matter how much they fed it. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. "Open the door, open the door, open the door." The walls rattled. The floorboards shook. The glass bulged again. Alyssa fell to her knees, clutching her rosary. "It's not a cabin. It's a gate. We were brought here." Mark grabbed her shoulders, shaking her. "What do you mean a gate?" But before she could answer, the window shattered. The wind howled through the room, carrying with it shadows that moved like liquid smoke, faces twisting in and out of form. They poured inside, cold and endless. Mark screamed, swinging a broken chair leg, but it passed through them like air. Alyssa's prayers were drowned out by the chorus of whispers. Jenna tried to run, but the shadows wrapped around her legs, pulling her down. The last thing she saw was Chris's face among the shadows, pale and empty, mouthing the same words as the rest. "Let us in." And then, silence. When the caretaker returned a week later, the cabin was empty. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Just 4 sets of belongings left behind, food still on the counter, and one word carved deep into the wooden floor by something sharp and unnatural. "Taken." He closed the door, locked it, and hung the keys back on the rusted hook outside. The next group will be arriving in 2 days. And Pine Hollow always hungered. The lake was still, too still. Even the insects seemed to avoid its surface, as though the water itself whispered warnings they could understand. Sam and Leah hadn't cared. For them, the weekend was supposed to be romantic, a quiet getaway from city noise, a chance to repair the cracks in their relationship. They had rented the cabin online, a rustic place right at the edge of Blackwater Lake, its deck stretching out into the water like an invitation. When they arrived, the sun was dipping low, the lake glowing like molten glass. The cabin was small but charming, with cedar walls and the faint smell of wood smoke baked into its beams. Leah smiled, running her fingers along the windowsill. "See? I told you it would be perfect." Sam forced a smile. He hadn't liked the caretaker's expression when he handed them the key, a man with watery blue eyes who muttered under his breath, "Don't go near the lake after dark." They thought it was just small-town superstition. The first night was peaceful. They made dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and laughed by candlelight. The lake glistened under the moon, silver and endless. But around midnight, Leah woke to the sound of dripping. Drip, drip, drip. At first, she thought it was rain. But when she opened her eyes, the window was dry. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the ceiling. She nudged Sam awake. "Do you hear that?" Sam rubbed his eyes. "Probably a leak. Go back to sleep." But the dripping grew louder, and when Leah finally dared to look up, her stomach lurched. Dark spots spread across the wooden ceiling, like water stains. But it wasn't water. The drops that splattered onto the floorboards were thick, sticky, red. "Sam," she whispered, her throat dry. "That's blood." Sam jumped up, grabbed a flashlight, and aimed it at the ceiling. The beam caught a slow trickle running between the wooden slats, staining them darker. "Maybe an animal." He started, but Leah was already backing away. "There's something up there." They scrambled outside, into the cold night. The moon was full, silver light spilling across the black water. Sam grabbed a rickety ladder nailed to the side of the cabin and climbed toward the roof. Leah waited below, arms wrapped tight around herself. Every ripple on the surface of the lake felt like eyes watching. "Anything?" she called. Sam's voice drifted down. "I don't. Wait. There's nothing here. No animal. No." His words cut off. Leah's heart froze. "Sam!" Then came the sound. Not footsteps, not movement, but a dragging. Something heavy scraping across the roof, circling. "Sam!" Leah shouted, but when she shined her phone's flashlight upward, the roof was empty. Her boyfriend was gone. Panic clawed through her chest. She scrambled around the cabin, calling his name, but the only sound was the water lapping gently at the dock. Then she saw it. Footprints. Bare. Wet. Leading from the side of the cabin straight toward the lake, and disappearing into the water. Leah's breath hitched. She fell to her knees at the dock, shining the light desperately across the lake's surface. For a moment, it was calm. Empty. Then something broke the surface. Not Sam. A hand. Too pale. Too long. Fingers like wet branches reaching up before slipping silently back beneath the black water. Leah screamed, stumbling back. The lake rippled, then went still again, as if it had swallowed her boyfriend whole. Shaking, she ran back into the cabin, locking the door, barricading it with furniture. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she backed into the living room. That's when she saw the ceiling again. The dripping had stopped, but carved into the wood, deep and jagged, was a single word. Mine. Leah didn't sleep. She sat by the fire until dawn, clutching a kitchen knife, every shadow shifting like it might reach for her. When the sun finally rose, she dared to go outside. The lake shimmered peacefully, no sign of what had happened the night before. She half convinced herself she had imagined it all, that Sam had gone for help, that she'd find him walking back down the dirt road any moment. But then she noticed something else. Wet footprints. Fresh ones. Leading from the water, not toward the cabin, but circling it, over and over, like something had walked the perimeter all night. Her chest tightened. She ran to the car, but the engine coughed and died. She tried again and again, but it was useless. The caretaker's voice echoed in her head. "Don't go near the lake after dark." She had laughed then. She wasn't laughing now. By afternoon, exhaustion dragged her down. She tried to sleep on the couch, but dreams pulled her deep into black water. She dreamt of Sam's face, pale and bloated, his mouth open too wide, his eyes staring straight through her. She woke to the sound of humming. A low, distorted tune, drifting through the cabin like a lullaby sung underwater. Leah's blood ran cold. It was coming from outside. The dock. Slowly, against her better judgment, she crept to the window. The lake was calm. The dock stretched into the water, empty, but at the end of it, sitting with its back to her, was a figure. Soaked clothes clung to its body. Dark hair dripped down its shoulders. "Sam," she whispered, tears flooding her eyes. The figure tilted its head, slowly, too slowly, and smiled. Leah's breath caught in her throat. The figure at the edge of the dock sat motionless, its wet clothes clinging, its head tilted just a fraction too far. "Sam," she whispered again, her voice cracking. The figure stood, slowly, limbs jerking as though they weren't quite its own. Water streamed from its body, pooling darkly on the wood. It turned. The face was Sam's. But it wasn't. His eyes were too wide, the whites clouded like milk. His mouth stretched open in a grin that showed too many teeth, far more than a human should have. Leah staggered back from the window, choking on a sob. No, this isn't real." The figure began to walk up the dock toward the cabin. Each step echoed like a hollow drumbeat. Thump, thump, thump. Leah bolted for the door and shoved every chair she could find against it. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the knife. The humming returned, louder now, vibrating through the wood of the cabin. It wasn't a song anymore. It was words, distorted, bubbling, dragged through water. "Leah, let me in. I'm cold. I'm hungry." She pressed her palms against her ears, rocking back and forth. "You're not Sam. You're not Sam." The door rattled. Once, twice, then harder. The hinges screamed. Leah ran to the back, searching desperately for another exit. The cabin's small windows were too narrow to climb through. The only other way out was a back door, which led straight to the lake. And that was worse. Her eyes darted around, landing on the trapdoor in the corner, the small hatch that led to the cabin's crawl space. With no other choice, she yanked it open and slid inside, pulling it shut above her. Darkness swallowed her whole. The dirt was damp beneath her hands, the air thick and suffocating. She curled into the shadows, trying to silence her own ragged breathing. Above her, footsteps echoed. Wet, heavy, slow. The boards creaked as a thing, whatever wore Sam's face, moved through the cabin. And then, silence. Minutes crawled by. Leah's arms ached from holding herself so tightly, her body trembling with cold. Just as she began to think it had gone, something whispered right behind her. "You can't hide here." Leah's scream tore through the crawl space. She scrambled toward the trapdoor, clawing her way out, her nails splitting against the wood. She shoved the hatch open and stumbled back into the cabin. The fire had gone out. The room was colder than ice. And standing in the center, dripping lake water onto the wooden floor, was Sam. Only now his grin stretched from ear to ear, splitting his skin. His jaw unhinged, and his voice came out laid, like 100 voices speaking at once. "The lake is hungry." Leah's knife slipped from her hand. Her legs refused to move. The thing lunged. She barely managed to dodge, crashing into the table. Splinters tore into her arms as she scrambled upright. The front door shook violently, though she hadn't touched it. Something else was outside, more footsteps. Many. Leah grabbed a lantern, swung it hard, and smashed it against the creature's face. Flames burst across its skin, but instead of burning, it only laughed. The sound was wet, hollow, endless. It staggered back just enough for Leah to run. She shoved through the back door, out into the freezing night, her feet pounding across the date. The lake stretched before her, black and endless. Shapes stood along the water's edge, dozens of them, pale figures with bloated faces, dripping clothes, eyes wide and empty. Some were children, some adults, all staring at her in silence. Her breath caught as she recognized some of them, faces from the photos in the cabin, old black and white images of families who had once stayed here. And among them, Sam, or what was left of him. "Leah," he croaked, his voice breaking apart like static. "Stay with me, forever." The figures began to move, slowly, into the water. One by one, they sank beneath the surface, disappearing without a ripple. The humming returned, deep and endless, like the lake itself was alive. Leah turned and ran into the trees. Branches clawed at her skin, roots tore at her shoes, but she didn't stop. The forest seemed endless, every turn leading her back toward the water. By dawn, she collapsed. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on the dock. The lake was calm, the cabin silent behind her. Sam stood over her. His smile was soft, gentle, the way it used to be. He reached down a hand. "It's okay," he whispered. "It was just a bad dream. Come with me." Her heart twisted. Maybe it really had been a nightmare. Maybe he was alive, and everything else had been in her head. Her fingers brushed his, and the water opened beneath her. Hands, hundreds of them, rose from the black depths, dragging her down. She screamed, but the sound filled with water, choking her, silencing her. The last thing she saw was Sam's face, smiling down at her from the dock as the lake swallowed her whole. A week later, the caretaker unlocked the cabin. The place smelled of damp wood and mildew. The fireplace was cold. 2 suitcases sat by the door, untouched. On the deck, he found wet footprints leading back and forth, circling endlessly. He sighed, shaking his head. The lake keeps what it takes. As he turned to leave, he glanced at the water one last time. For just a moment, he saw her, Leah, standing knee-deep in the lake, her eyes pale and empty, her lips mouthing the same words as all the others. "Join us." And then she was gone. The caretaker locked the door, hung the key back on the hook, and walked away. The lake was still again. Too still. The road up Hollow Ridge was barely a road at all. Just a strip of date, winding through skeletal trees that clawed at the sky. Derek gripped the steering wheel tighter as the rental car jolted over rocks. In the back seat, His younger sister Emily pressed her forehead against the window, her breath fogging the glass. "Are we almost there?" she muttered. "Almost," Derek said. His voice was calm, but his jaw was tight. The GPS had lost signal 20 minutes ago, and the only directions they had were the caretaker's vague instructions. "Follow the ridge until you see the crooked pine. The cabin's just beyond." Emily frowned. "Why did you book this place?" "It's creepy." Derek forced a chuckle. "Cheapest option I could find. Besides, a weekend away will be good for us." But the truth was heavier. Their father had died 3 months ago. Derek thought a trip might distract them, pull Emily out of the silence she'd sunk into. They finally saw it. The crooked pine, bent almost in half as though something had pressed it down long ago. Beyond it stood the cabin, crouched low against the ridge. Its roof sagged, its porch leaned dangerously, and its windows reflected nothing but black. Emily shivered. "It looks abandoned." Derek parked anyway. Inside, the cabin was rough but livable. Dust coated the shelves, cobwebs stretched across corners, and the air smelled faintly of damp earth. But the fireplace worked, the beds were made, and the caretaker had left firewood stacked by the wall. By nightfall, the siblings sat by the fire, eating canned soup and trying to pretend the place was cozy. Emily was quiet, staring into the flames. Derek nudged her gently. "Hey, remember how Dad used to take us camping? He'd always burn the marshmallows because he held them too close to the fire." Emily smiled faintly, but her eyes watered. "Do you ever feel like he's still here?" Derek hesitated. "Sometimes." She nodded, her gaze drifting toward the window. "Because I think he's watching us." Derek frowned. "What do you mean?" Emily's face was pale. "I saw him. Outside." The fire popped. Derek shook his head. "Emily, Dad's gone." "I know what I saw," she whispered. Derek brushed it off as grief, exhaustion, or the tricks of firelight against the glass. But later that night, as he lay in the creaking bed, he heard it too. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow knocks against the front door. His breath caught. He sat up, straining his ears. Knock, knock, knock. Emily stirred in the other bed. "Derek," she whispered. "It's fine. Probably the wind." But it wasn't the wind. The knocking was deliberate, patient. Each knock spaced exactly 10 seconds apart, echoing through the wood. Derek forced himself to stand. He crept to the door, every muscle in his body tense. "Who's there?" he called. Silence. His hand hovered over the knob, but something in his gut screamed, "Don't." From behind him, Emily whispered, "Derek, look." He turned. She was pointing at the window, and Derek's blood turned to ice. A face stared back at them through the glass. It was their father, pale, gaunt, his eyes too dark, his mouth hanging slightly open. Emily sobbed. "Dad!" The face pressed closer, lips moving soundlessly. Derek grabbed her hand and yanked her away from the window. "That's not him," he hissed. "It can't be." The knocking returned, harder now. The windows rattled in their frames. The fire dimmed as if the air itself was being pulled out of the room. Derek dragged Emily to the bedroom and locked the door. They huddled together, listening as the thing outside circled the cabin, dragging its fingers along the wood. Emily shook violently. It looked like him. What if it really is? Derek swallowed hard. Dad's dead. Whatever that is, it isn't him. But even as he said it, he wasn't sure. Hours passed in a haze of fear. Sometime before dawn, the noise stopped. Silence pressed down heavy, broken only by Emily's quiet sobs. When they finally dared to look outside in the morning, there were footprints in the date. Bare footprints, leading from the forest, circling the cabin, then disappearing back into the trees. Too large to be their father's. Too deep. Too wrong. That day, Derek tried to convince Emily to leave. "We'll walk. Follow the ridge until we hit the road. Someone will pick us up." But when they set out, the forest didn't behave. The ridge stretched longer than it should have, the trees twisting back on themselves. After hours of walking, they stumbled back into the same crooked pine. The cabin stood before them again, waiting. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "We can't leave." Derek clenched his fists. "We will." We just need a plan. But that night, the knocking returned. Louder, closer. This time, the voice came too. Let me in. Emily, it's me. Her name, spoken in their father's voice. Emily trembled. He's calling me. He knows my name. It has to be him. Derek grabbed her shoulders. It's not him. Whatever it is, it's lying. But Emily's eyes were fixed on the door, her lips trembling. The voice grew stronger, more desperate. I'm cold. I'm lost. Let me in, Emily. She began to move toward the door. Derek pulled her back, shouting, but the sound was drowned out by the deafening boom, boom, boom of fists hammering against the cabin walls. The whole house shook. Dust rained from the rafters. The fire blew out, plunging them into darkness. And in the blackness, something breathed, right behind them. The cabin shuddered under invisible fists. The walls trembled, the ceiling groaned, and in the pitch dark, Derek could barely hear his own voice over the thunderous pounding. Stay with me, he shouted, clutching Emily's arm. But Emily's eyes were wide and glassy. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking through him, toward the front door. Dad, she whispered. The voice came again, impossibly close, as if it seeped from the very wood around them. Emily, open up. Please. I'm cold out here. Derek shook her hard. It's not him. Don't listen. But she tore away from his grip, stumbling toward the living room. The sound of her bare feet slapping the floor was swallowed by the pounding on the walls. Derek lunged after her. Emily. She reached the door, her trembling fingers grazing the lock. The voice softened, almost tender now. That's it. Sweetheart, just let me in. We'll be together again, like before. Derek grabbed her wrist just as she twisted the lock. The door creaked, the latch giving way. With a roar, Derek yanked her back, slamming his shoulder against the wood to hold it shut. Help me, he screamed. But Emily didn't help. She sobbed, clawing at his arms. You don't understand. It's him. He's hurting out there. The door rattled violently, each slam nearly breaking Derek's hold. Splinters shot off the frame. Something on the other side wanted in badly. Emily, look at me. Derek gasped. Dad is dead. Whatever that thing is, it's wearing his face. Her lips trembled, her nails digging into his skin. For one long, terrifying moment, Derek thought she might shove him aside. Then, silence. The pounding stopped. The air stilled. For a moment, all Derek heard was his own ragged breathing. Then, faintly, from the trees, Emily. The voice was fading, retreating. The wood swallowed it whole. Derek collapsed against the door, shaking. Emily curled on the floor, clutching her knees, her sobs tearing through the silence. They didn't sleep that night. By morning, Derek knew they couldn't survive another round. They had to escape, curse or no curse. They packed what little they had, determined to leave Hollow Ridge behind. But when Derek opened the cabin door, his breath caught. The footprints were back, deep, fresh, circling the cabin again. Except this time, there were dozens of them, different sizes, different shapes. Some long and skeletal, others twisted, with claw-like impressions at the tips. Not just one thing. Many. Emily stared, pale as bone. They're waiting. Derek grabbed her hand. We keep moving. Don't stop, no matter what. They walked for hours, through twisted paths that led nowhere, under trees that seemed to lean closer with every step. Emily grew weaker, stumbling. Her voice was barely a whisper. I can't go on. Yes, you can, Derek insisted, dragging her forward. We'll find a way out. But the woods were endless, and the whispers began again. This time, not just their father's voice. Derek, Emily, over here, come closer. The voices came from every direction, low and coaxing, like a chorus of the dead. Emily stopped, covering her ears. Make it stop, she screamed, and then she ran. Emily! Derek shouted, chasing her through the underbrush. Branches clawed his skin, roots snagged his feet. He stumbled, lungs burning, until he saw her ahead, standing perfectly still. She wasn't alone. The figure beside her was her father. pale, hollow-eyed, his hand resting gently on Emily's shoulder. "Emily, no!" Derek yelled, but Emily turned to him, her face tear-streaked yet strangely calm. "It's okay, Derek. He found us. He just wants us to come home." The figure's mouth stretched into something that might have been a smile, except too wide, too sharp. "Emily," Derek rasped, "that's not him." But her hand was already in the figure's. Derek charged forward, but before he could reach her, the ground beneath him gave way. The earth opened, swallowing him into blackness. He tumbled down a pit, crashing against roots and rocks, until he landed hard on damp soil. His vision blurred, but he forced himself to look up. Above, at the edge of the pit, Emily peered down at him. The figure stood beside her. Its face flickered, changing, first their father's, then something twisted, eyeless, mouth gaping like a void. Emily reached her hand down toward him. "Come with us, Derek." "No," he choked. "Fight it, please." But she only shook her head. "You don't understand. We belong here now." The figure bent close to her ear, whispering words Derek couldn't hear. Emily's expression softened. Then she turned and walked into the trees, hand in hand with the thing. Derek screamed until his throat tore, but the forest absorbed his cries, leaving him alone in the pit. Hours passed, maybe days. Time didn't exist in the darkness. Derek clawed at the walls, desperate to climb out. His nails split, his hands bled, but the pit was too deep. And then he heard it. Knock, knock, knock. From the dirt itself, from beneath him. His breath caught. Slowly, he lowered his ear to the soil. A voice drifted up, muffled, but unmistakable. "Derek, it's Emily. Let me out." His chest caved with terror. He had just seen Emily walk away with that thing. Yet her voice was here, under the ground. "Please, Derek, I'm trapped. Help me." He stumbled back against the wall, shaking his head. "No, no, you're not real. You're not her." But the knocking grew louder, more desperate. "Brother, don't leave me down here. Let me in." The soil shifted beneath his feet, softening like something was clawing its way up. A pale hand burst through the date, reaching for him. Fingers too long, skin peeling, nails like black glass. Derek screamed. The hand closed around his ankle, pulling him down into the soil. The last thing he heard before the earth swallowed him whole was Emily's voice, soft, sweet, and impossibly close. "We're family again." The cabin on Hollow Ridge still stands. Travelers who stray too close claim to hear knocking in the night, and sometimes, if the wind is still, the soft cry of a girl calling for her brother. Most don't stay long enough to find out what happens if you answer. The house on Willow Creek had been empty for 12 years. When Hannah pulled into the cracked driveway, her stomach twisted. The old family cabin looked smaller than she remembered. Crouched beneath the sagging willows, its once white paint long faded to gray. The porch leaned, the shutters dangled loose, and the screen door hung crooked on a single rusted hinge. "This was a mistake," she muttered. But the lawyer's words echoed in her mind. "The cabin is legally yours now. You'll need to decide whether to sell it or keep it." Her parents had died when she was just a teenager. After that night, after what she'd seen, Hannah had sworn never to set foot in this place again. But time had a way of dragging the past back up, like bones rising through shallow earth. She killed the engine. The silence pressed against the car windows, thick and heavy. Even the creek behind the cabin was still, its waters dark as oil. Hannah's younger brother, Jacob, climbed out of the passenger seat. He was 23 now, though he still had that boyish grin. "Creepy," he said, stuffing his hands into his hoodie pocket. "But kinda cool, too, like we're in a horror movie." Hannah glared at him. "This isn't a game." Jacob shrugged. "Hey, I was just a kid when we left. I barely remember anything. You're the one who saw." He trailed off. "Exactly," Hannah snapped, slamming her door shut. They hauled their bags inside. Dust rose in clouds with every step, the air thick with mildew. The living room smelled faintly of smoke, though the fireplace hadn't been lit in years. Family photos still lined the mantel, their glass faces fogged with grime. Jacob picked one up, squinting. "Wow, you look so young here. Was this the night Dad built that big fire out back? Hannah's throat tightened. That night, she remembered the fire, the marshmallows, the way the wood seemed to lean closer when the flames burned low, and the knocking, always the knocking. She turned away. Let's just get through this weekend. Then we can decide what to do with the place. That evening, rain swept in, hammering the roof and windows. They ate takeout by lantern light, since the power lines had long been cut. Jacob made jokes, trying to lighten the mood, but Hannah barely heard him. Her eyes kept drifting to the back window, to the tree line beyond. When she was 16, she'd seen something there, a figure standing among the willows, watching. She had told her parents, but they hadn't believed her. They told her it was grief, stress, imagination, until the night the knocking started. Knock! 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 She shook the memory away, but her skin prickled all the same. Later, when Jacob went to bed in their parents' old room, Hannah sat awake by the fireplace, listening to the storm. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the house groaned with every gust of wind. Then she heard it. Knock! 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 Her heart stopped. It was faint, muffled by the storm, but unmistakable. 3 deliberate knocks against the back door. She froze, her breath shallow. For 12 years she had tried to convince herself it hadn't been real, that what she'd heard as a teenager was only in her head. But now, knock, 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 louder this time. Hannah grabbed the lantern, her hand trembling. She moved through the kitchen, the floorboards creaking like whispers. The back door loomed ahead, its paint peeling, its glass warped with age. Hello? She forced out. No answer, just the rain dripping from the eaves. She stepped closer, raising the lantern. Her reflection glowed faintly in the glass. And behind her reflection, something moved. A shape, tall, shadowed, leaning close to the window from the other side. Hannah staggered back, her throat closing around a scream. The lantern slipped from her hand, clattering against the floor. The light sputtered, then died. Darkness swallowed the kitchen. And then, from the silence, came a whisper. Hannah. Her knees nearly buckled. The voice was dry, rasping, like leaves dragged across stone. But it was familiar, too familiar. Let me in. Her father's voice. No, she whispered. You're dead. You've been dead for 12 years. But the voice came again, closer now, as though it seeped through the cracks in the wood. Hannah, it's cold out here. Please open the door. Tears burned her eyes. She stumbled backward, knocking into the counter, clutching the edge for support. From down the hall, Jacob's sleepy voice called, Hannah, what's going on? Stay in your room, she shouted. But it was too late. The knocking spread, from the windows, the walls, even the floor beneath her feet. Knock, 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 everywhere at once. Jacob stumbled into the hall, rubbing his eyes. What the hell is that? A shadow moved across the living room wall. Not theirs, not cast by the lantern. Something too tall, too thin, with arms that seemed to reach the ceiling. Hannah's voice broke. It's them. They are back. Jacob frowned. Who? But before she could answer, the back door groaned. Its hinges screamed as it would split down the center, though nothing had touched it. From the gap between the boards, 2 pale fingers slid through. The fingers pushed further through the splintered door, pale and bloated as though they had been soaking in water for weeks. The nails were black, curling. They scratched against the wood, digging grooves. Jacob froze, his mouth open. What the hell is that? Hannah grabbed his arm, yanking him back. Don't look. Don't listen. It's not Dad. But the voice slithered through the cracks again, soft and pleading. Hannah, Jacob, it's me. Let me in. Don't you recognize my voice? Jacob trembled. That is his voice. Hannah shook her head violently. No, it sounds like him. That's how it tricks you. That's how it's always tricked us. The knocking began again, harder, faster. The whole cabin rattled. Pictures falling from the walls, dust raining from the rafters. The shadow on the wall stretched longer, its head almost scraping the ceiling. Please, let me come home. The back door finally gave way with a crack like thunder. The top half split open, with shards scattering across the floor. But no one stood on the porch. Just darkness. And in that darkness, two eyes, milky, glowing faintly, hovering in the black like lanterns drowned underwater. Jacob staggered back. Oh my God! The eyes blinked, and with a sudden, jerking lunge, the thing pulled itself through the shattered frame. It wasn't their father. Not anymore. Its body was twisted, stretched too tall, its limbs thin and jointed wrong. Its face was their father's, but swollen and slack, the jaw unhinged too wide, teeth long and yellowed. And yet the voice remained calm, gentle. Don't be afraid. I just want my children. Hannah shoved Jacob toward the hallway. Run! They bolted through the house, the thing scraping along the walls as it followed, its long arms dragging across the wood. The floorboards groaned under its weight, though it moved with unnatural speed, almost gliding. They slammed into the bedroom, shoving the door shut behind them. Jacob leaned against it, chest heaving. What the hell is that? Hannah grabbed a lantern from the nightstand, her hands shaking. When we were kids, when Mom and Dad died, I saw it. I saw that thing. It took their faces. That's why I never came back. Jacob's eyes widened. You mean, it wasn't an accident? Hannah's throat tightened. They didn't burn in the fire. The fire was to keep it out. But it was too late. It already had them. The door jolted as something slammed against it. A crack spidered through the wood. Hannah, don't lie to him. Tell Jacob the truth. Jacob's voice shook. The truth? What's it talking about? The whisper seeped through the cracks, wrapping around them. She opened the door that night. She let me in. Jacob's face went white. He turned slowly toward Hannah. What does it mean? Hannah's stomach dropped. No, don't listen. It's lying. But deep inside, a memory stirred. She had been 16. Terrified. The knocking had come, the voice of her mother begging. She hadn't meant to, but her trembling fingers had slipped the latch. And the thing had entered. The shadow on the wall swelled, massive, filling the room. Jacob's face twisted with horror and betrayal. You let it in. Tears streamed down Hannah's cheeks. I was a kid. I thought it was them. I didn't know. The door burst open. The figure loomed in the frame, its arms stretching unnaturally wide, scraping the ceiling. Jacob screamed, but Hannah shoved him toward the window. Go! Now! He hesitated. What about you? Just go. Jacob scrambled through the broken glass, dropping into the wet grass outside. Hannah turned back to the monster, clutching the lantern like a weapon. Its face shifted as it approached. One moment her father's, then her mother's, then hers. You'll never leave. Hannah, this house is ours. Always has been. Always will be. She hurled the lantern at its chest. Fire erupted, spilling across its body. The creature shrieked, its voice warping into 100 others at once. The room filled with the smell of burning rot. Hannah leapt through the shattered window after her brother. They ran into the night, the cabin roaring with fire behind them. The willows swayed, their long branches thrashing as though the forest itself was alive. Behind them, the thing's scream echoed, inhuman and endless. They didn't stop running until they reached the main road, collapsing under the glow of the first street lamp. Rain hissed on the pavement, washing the ash from their skin. Jacob clutched her arm, his face pale. It's over, right? We killed it. Hannah stared back at the black line of trees. The cabin's fire glowed faintly in the distance, like a second sunrise. She wanted to believe it, wanted to believe they were free. But then she heard it. Knock, 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 soft, deliberate, coming from inside her chest, like her heartbeat had learned a new rhythm. Her breath hitched. Jacob frowned. Hannah, what is it? She didn't answer. She only clutched her shirt over her heart, where the knocking grew louder. Let me in. Her father's voice.